Visit anything that we're going to cover today, you're more than welcome to ask for the recording. Some housekeeping, we have gone ahead and muted everyone. And so, oops, no, one more, mute all. That way you will not be able to hear any background noise, but if you want to unmute and ask a question live, feel free to go ahead. This is a really exciting class because we're covering a topic that we really haven't discussed, at least at Corkbuzz, just yet, and there's quite a lot of material to go through. I was working all day on this. I was in like these little rabbit holes because I would read more about a grape, and then I would want to read more, and I pretty much spent my whole day just reading about Italian indigenous grapes. So it was very exciting. I was like pretty much all day long on my porch in the beautiful sunshine, thinking about our trips to Italy. So for those of you that got the backpack to go along with the classes this week, you will have received 2 wines, which you may open or you might save, or you might open both or one, but we sent Verdicchio di Castello di Jesse, which we're going to discuss, which is from Sartorelli, the beautiful producer in the Marche. And we sent a Manenti, which is a Ceresuolo di Vittoria, so Nero d'Avola Frappato blend from Sicily. So maybe in the chat you want to tell each other what you're drinking or what you love in Italian grapes, something that you feel when you taste this grape, it really makes you happy, or it makes you, this description. So feel free to chat with each other. I'll periodically look at the chat and just see if there's anything we should be thinking about. But this is one of my favorite grapes, and you're going to see it in a bit on the screen. And so that's what I'm going to sip on after class and enjoy tonight. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. And with that said, let's explore Italy together via indigenous grapes. Okay, great. So we're going to just cover a little bit of background because this is an Italian wine class. I want to make sure you're familiar with the geography of Italy. There are 20 autonomous regions that collectively make up the country of Italy. So in the fact that it was unified in the late 1800s, most people still, if you're in a region, will have a regional pride, sense of pride, right? If I am a person that lives right here in Val d'Aosta, on the border of Switzerland and France, I'm very committed to maybe speaking French and having influence of the French cuisine, and I'm going to be growing indigenous grapes, which we'll talk about when we get to Val d'Aosta, but this is the smallest region in France, so right up here in this little kind of gray area by Switzerland. And just south of that, we have the famous region of Piedmont, the foothills of the mountains, Pied meaning foot, and mountains, surrounded by Alps on 3 sides. And we know and love the grapes of the regions of Barolo and Barbaresco. There's a noble grape called Nebbiolo in Piedmont, but we're not going to discuss her wine, Piedmont, because Nebbiolo is a very, I guess you can say, famous or regal grape, but rather we're going to explore the grapes from Piedmont that maybe you want to go out and try. What I love about these kind of classes is that it really exposes you to grapes that you've never heard of, and perhaps you can save a lot of money in your wine drinking. One of the best things about Italy is the value for the off the beaten path wines. So later on, we'll talk about a grape called Fresia in Piedmont. We'll talk about the Timoroso grape, which I said is one of my favorite discoveries of Italian whites. Very hot right now, very relevant. A lot of people talking about Timoroso. I went on Piedmont for a wedding, and I drank Timoroso with like 10 years of age in this beautiful 3-star restaurant in Barbaresco. So anyway, we'll talk about the foothills of the mountains and the lesser known grapes. Liguria, if you haven't been, when this is all over, please promise to go to Liguria. You will find yourself drinking Pigatto, or perhaps Vermentino. This is where the best pesto comes from in Liguria. This on the Mediterranean Sea, really incredible seafood. So it's a great trip to fly into Milan and maybe go to Liguria and eat your weight in fish and drink the local Picato grape, and then perhaps take a little trip to Piedmont where you'll find yourself eating vitello tonato and clean. So I think that's a really great trip. You have your red wines and your white wines. But in Liguria, we also have these incredible reds. There's a red grape called Rossesi, and Rossesi is one of my favorites. So when we're thinking about red wines to go with fish, guess what? The local Ligurian wines are great. We'll briefly cover Lombardia. Most people know Lombardia for Franciacorta, or because it's close to Milan. But Lombardia has some local grapes. You'll actually see some crossover grapes from Piedmont to Lombardia, which makes a ton of sense. The thing about geography, and when we look at maps, it really solidifies it. So if I say in Lombardia, there's a grape called Chivanesca, and Chivanesca is also grown in Piedmont where it's called Nebbiolo. So there'll be fun kind of crossover grapes. We'll talk a lot about Trentino, Alto Adige. This is the southern part of the Tyrol in the Tyrolean Empire on the border of Austria. You can imagine part of the Austrian and Hungarian Empire. So in Trentino, Alto Adige, we speak German as well as Italian and English. There's incredible local grapes, things like Schiava, Lagrein, Tiraldigo. You're going to see all these names in print, because the thing about Italian wine is there's different spellings for grapes depending on where they're growing. There's even different synonyms for grapes. So we might call one grape one thing in a local dialect, we call it something else. So it's one of the reasons that you can spend your whole life studying Italy and still feel slightly lost, but not to worry. So after we go to Trentino Alto Adige, we're going to talk about Friuli Venezia Giulia, this beautiful white wine for the most part producing region on the border of Slovenia and Austria. Head down to the Veneto, where we know we find Soave, Prosecco, Amarone, but we're going to talk about other grapes besides those common ones. I think we're today, just because of time, we're going to skip over the belly of Italy, which is Emilia Romagna. We'll talk about Tuscany. Of course, you know the Sangiovese grape, but there's other things like, for example, you can find Colorino, which is sometimes a blending grape, or Canaiolo, where we'll talk about those. Umbria, where we find the noble grape Sagrantino. We're going to take a trip to the Marche, which is on the Adriatic. And we'll have all these beautiful wines that grow, again, with crudo, with raw bar. We'll skip over Lazio just for today. Abruzzo and Molise a little bit too. We'll dive into Campania, where they have a lot of influence of Greek grapes, such as Greco di Tufo, Fiano, Falanghina, Aglianico. My God, it sounds crazy, right? We'll have to taste and talk about, well, we'll talk about rather the grapes of Calabria, specifically a grape called Galliopo, a little bit more about Sicily, and then Sardinia. So we're going to cover a lot. As you know, the Alps are in the north, the Apennines kind of are the spine of Italy, and there's a lot of climatic influence. So besides the fact that we're going to talk about all these regions, the climate is greatly going to affect the flavors of the wines. So ancient Greeks, we know they named it Onotria. It's the Italian, land of the wine. And end of 3rd century, there was vines throughout the peninsula. The Greeks brought the vines, the Romans organized the vines and spread the vine throughout all of Europe. It as a country was unified in 1861, but we really think that even to this present time, there's a lot of pride of ownership of these small regions within the country. So yes, it's Italian, but there is a lot of differences between the 20 regions. And in 1963, we introduced a system called the DOC system, which is modeled after the French appellation origin protégé. So you see these labels on your bottles. They look like tags, and they're controlled regions of specific origin. So denominación, origin controllate. So it basically means the wine governing body is going to tell you what grapes you can grow, where the geographical boundaries of a region stop and start, what the yields are, sometimes what the aging requirements are, and of course, the types of grapes that are allowed to be planted there. What we really have seen is a huge increase in the highest level of quality in Italy called DOCGs. So all of the EU was attempting to get rid of these different initials, AOC, DOC, DOCIA, and they were trying to have one unified system. And so when that happened, Italy rushed to get a lot of their formerly second level quality wines approved at the top level. So it's the very typical Italian thing to do when you're not really sure if you like the laws, you just kind of make up your own rules. So, but we will really focus today on the grapes that make this country such a rich country. As I mentioned, DOCG, it means Denominación de Origen Controlata, and in the case of G, it means guaranteed. So this is the top level of quality, and then just underneath, Denominación de Origen Protetta. You know, there are DOCs and DOCGs for olive oil, for different cheeses. So it is not just wine, but these are the protected regions. And then we have regional appellations similar to the French Vin de Pays, Indicazione Geografica Protetta, which is basically the holding area before you go up to the top quality. And then Vino da Tavola. And you're familiar with Super Tuscan movement, maybe in that category. This is why the system, the pyramid system, kind of got turned on its side or turned upside down. So if you can recall, and this is really fun and relevant to grape varieties. So imagine a pyramid where this is the top and this is the bottom, Vino da Tavola. And the governing body that controls wine, we'll start with Chianti as an example. Chianti was a DOCG, and the governing body that controlled wine said, okay, if you want to use the DOCG Chianti Classico, you must plant a grape called Sangiovese, and you must plant and blend that with a grape called Trebbiano, which is a white grape. And Trebbiano is not the best grape. It's kind of used for brandy. It's a very high yielding grape, so kind of like a neutral flavor. But a lot of producers said that's kind of dated just because the recipe for making DOCG wine say I have to use these white inferior grapes. Perhaps I should just make a wine without that. And what happened was, as the experimentation and the need for really wanting to make wines their way, whether it was using international grapes in the case of wineries like Sassicaia, they didn't fit the rules within their geographical boundaries. So what happened was they had to declassify their wine. So if you started out as Chianti Classico, but you didn't use the grapes prescribed in, let's call it the recipe of the DOCG, your wine got declassified. And perhaps at that time, the only place it fit was Vino da Tavola. So if you're familiar with Sassicaia and you know that the 1979 vintage was one of the first, if you look at Sassicaia label in 1979, it will just say Vino da Tavola, Italy, even though it was from Tuscany and more specifically from Bulgaria. So eventually, because of these really outdated rules that kind of handcuff the wineries, the top level wines were not even sold as DOCG anymore. They became Vino da Tavola. And then the Italians changed the laws because they didn't want the most expensive wines to be at the lower level of the pyramid. So anyway, this guy is brilliant. I love this man. This is what I did all day. I listened to this guy's podcast. His name is Ian D'Agata. He made probably the most relevant, important, exciting talks about wine in general. I mean, if you meet him, you might imagine you've met like the Dalai Lama as it relates to wine. I mean, he's kind, he's sweet, he's funny. He knows everyone in Italy and beyond. So he and I met because he was a judge for the Decanter Wine Awards, and we were doing a wine we were judging wines in London, This was about 5 years ago. And he was in charge of all of the Italian panels. So imagine a couple of master sommeliers like me and some masters of wine, and everyone's tasting probably 200 to 300 wines a day. And we're tasting them blind. They're different panels. So I was on the Italian panel, and Ian was like our head proctor. So we would get these brown bags and we would pour them and we would rate them and star them in gold and silver and so on and so forth. And anyway, I just like ended up at a table for 4 straight days, just like writing everything this man said. And luckily for me, he wrote a couple of books. This was the one that I was referencing all day today, Native Wine Grapes of Italy. He was on a podcast, if you're familiar with the Levy Dalton, I'll Drink to That on iTunes. Listen to him. I just can't say enough about him. So they say Italy has the largest number of indigenous grapes. As of 2006, in his book, they say that there was over 2,000 grapes, 2,000 grapes in Italy, the names of the grapes. Now, he also talks about that it's slightly confusing, Ian says, because yes, they say there's 2,000 grapes, but Italians can't really agree on things because there's biotypes. So they might be counting certain types of grapes as families or groups of grapes. So like there, for example, is the grape group called the Greco group, and there's some biotypes or specific styles of Greco that are different than others. And because of those, he says perhaps it's really closer to like 377 indigenous grapes. Now, that seems like a lot. How do we go from 2,000 to 377? There's other things that factor in. So there's the idea of indigenous grapes. They only grow in this one town, in this one specific place. There's the idea of native grapes, which might be, they're called native. They might have come from elsewhere, but by now they've been grown there for so long, they're almost from the region. And a good example of that is in Sardinia, we have a grape called Cannonau, and Cannonau, you'll see the spelling in a minute. Cannonau is known as Grenache in the rest of the world. So the idea is that an Italian grape? Well, no, because the island of Sardinia was owned and ruled by the Kingdom of Aragon, and it was the Spanish kingdom for a while. And so they thought that the Spanish Garnacha migrated to Sardinia with the Spanish rule, and that became known as Cannonau later on. So it's kind of counted as one of the indigenous grapes when we're thinking of the 2,000 grapes. But when we're talking specifically about native grapes, it's closer to 377. So what we're going to do is we're going to explore these regions and kind of group them into northern Italy. We already kind of recapped of these regions, but just to get a smaller look at a map, Val d'Aosta, the smallest, Piedmont, Lombardia, and Trentino, Alto Adige, you could almost break up into two separate regions. Alto Adige, also known as Sud Tyrol, and Trento. And then we have Friuli, Venezia, Giulia, and Veneto. So Liguria as well. So what we'll do is we'll go region by region talking about what I think are the special grapes. So let's start in the region of Friuli, Venezia, Giulia. And you know, I can't obviously tell you about every single grape. If I told you about every single grape, it would be a 17-hour class. So what I tried to do is I was going a little crazy at some point because I want to tell them about this one too, and this one too. And then all of a sudden Ryan's like, oh, do you need me to look over anything for your class? And I was like, I'm still doing it. It's like, I couldn't get away. So I just I wrote the indigenous grape names, but then I highlighted or called out a few that I think like, let's go and taste, let's go and talk about. And they're not necessarily the most popular, but I think that they're the most intriguing. So you probably have heard of a white grape called Ribolla Gialla. This is I would say, a well-known grape in Friuli, Venezia, Giulia. It also is known as Rebula in Slovenia, and Ian describes it, which I love, because I went to church and I remember my buttercup smell. They were these flowers growing outside of my church as a kid. And so it smells in Ribola Gialla like sunflowers and buttercups and yellow flowers, but it's not floral. So it's very interesting because I just described like something floral, but the Ribola Gialla is more like seeds. So the smell of not nuts, but the smell of seeds, right? So it's yellow and it's almost golden in color sometimes too. And then it's got this really lemon pepper kind of zingy quality to it. And actually, there are some people that do Ribola Gialla in the New World. Like, you know, it is an Italian, Slovenian, on that border of northeastern Italy. But there are producers even in Napa making Ribola Gialla. So some cuttings, like some of our favorite producers in Napa, like you might be familiar with Dan Petrosky. We had him on a class. He taught viticulture. He makes wine called Massacon. So he's looking to this area of Friuli as an inspiration. There are a lot of orange wines made in this area, in the Friuli Venezia, Giulia, or even the Tre Venezia area. So we can find Ribola Gialla as a skin fermented white wine too. For example, if you're looking for a great producer of Friuli Venezia, Giulia, skin fermented wine, I love Damijan. Damijan. It's with a Damijan. So, but I tried to say, okay, like if we were to think about some of the best producers of Ribola Gialla, I wanted to try them. Of course, you're going to get the notes after class, so you'll see all of these names, but perhaps there's a great producer called Miani. Fluga is kind of more well known in that they're distributed a little more regularly in Luisa. So thinking about Friuli Venezia, Giulia, maybe you'll have some prosciutto San Daniele. You'll have some, in this season especially, some cantaloupe, some honeydew, right? Your melon wrapped with prosciutto. And these white wines are the perfect grape and perfect blend. So now we probably want to talk about Tokai Friulano. You might be familiar with this grape. It's probably more popular even than Ribola Gialla. And Tokai Friulano is a grape that they also found to be related to Sauvignon Vert, which is known as Savignanese. I can never say that. I can say a lot, but not that. And Tokai, the region, which is in Hungary, sort of sued the Italians and said you can no longer use the name Tokai as the name of your grape because we've been making wine for, you know, well, even before the 12th century. And Tokai is a famous dessert wine, and so they made them stop using Friulano or Tokai as a name. And now the producers just call it Friulano. There are some producers that that kind of do like little jokes, and like one calls their wine Jacket, J-O-C. It's Tokai spelled backwards with a J. So I'm like trying to remember how to spell it. Oh yeah, Jakot. So there are ways that, you know, the Italians kind of get in their little zings, but that's what they would say, yes. Prosciutto San Daniele di prosciutto, Tokai Friulano. So that's a wine that you feel the Italian white grape characteristics of sweet almonds. So you have this bitter, almost pulling quality, and as well, lots of melon and white flowers. And there's a great producer that I love, Borgo del Tiglio, which I think is incredible. So lots to cover in Friuli Venezia, Giulia. Often what you do see is you'll see grapes that are international blended with indigenous grapes and maybe aromatic grapes. So Piccoli is a grape that is aromatic, so a little floral. So there's also, I mean, these are not the only grapes, of course, grown in Friuli Venezia, Giulia, but you might see producers that are what we used to call super Friulian. What they would do is they would make Chardonnay, they would blend it with Ribola Gialla, perhaps with Tokai, and they would make these special blends. So There's a well-known producer called German in Friuli, Venezia, Giulia, that does that. They make international and indigenous grapes and they blend them together. It was kind of a trend in the early, like mid 2000s. So when we think about this region, we do mostly think about white wines, but I'm in love with the reds. I think Ian says that Schioppettino is one of his absolute favorite red grapes that no one's known about. So Schioppettino name means gunshot or little crack. It's originated in this small village on the border of Slovenia called Prepotto. And the Schiopettinos that I love can remind me of both Rhone wines and Loire Valley. Especially now, I think that there's a very big shortage of finding unoaked red wines that are chillable, red wines that have character, but are maybe not like heavy. So summer reds, grilling reds. And this is where, again, the more you know, the real exciting things happen. So Schioppettino, Rhone peppery, it's a savory grape. It has that rotundum, that characteristic, but it also has a little bit of that bell pepper, sort of green, very savory. And I often, you know, it is a cool climate in this Friuli Venezia Giulia. So you get this sour fruit, the underripe red fruit. I find if you like Chinon or even some of the wines of Borgoi, this region called Borgoi in the Loire Valley, Schioppettino's for you. And also Borgo del Tiglio is a great producer of Schioppettino. There's tons of others. And I found out that there's one producer in Healdsburg named John Holdridge, which is growing Schioppettino. So back in California, before the gold rush, there was a lot of Italian immigrants, and they brought these cuttings of grapes. So when I was telling you about Moscon using Ribola Gialla in Napa, those are wines from very, very old vine cuttings. It's pretty cool. This was my favorite grape that I tried in 2020. That's Tazzalenghe. And Tazzalenghe is a name that means cuts the tongue. And it's an extremely, extremely acidic wine. Actually, I mean, there's a lot of acidity in Italian wines in general. We think about Italian reds and whites, but Italian reds specifically as the structure. So whenever you have Italian reds, you have tannin and acid as the Nebbiolo or Sangiovese, but some of these other grapes, wow, it's like the perfect wines for things that have high acidity, like tomato sauce, vinegars, vinaigrettes rather, things like that. So this is a wine that was almost like completely extinct. I put the label here of Le Duettori because this is the one that I had in 2020 that I fell in love with. So find it. It's not expensive at all, but the grape was almost extinct, as a lot of these grapes are, up until 1978. So it's native to this little town Udine, but you can find it in Butrio and Manzano as well. All of these are within the limits of Friuli Venezia Giulia. So the grape itself is a dark, thick, round grape. And there's only one DOC. The DOC is called Colli Orientali dei Friuli Tazzalenghe. So sometimes you'll see the name of a DOC with the name of the grape. It's a regional appellation specifically for that grape. So let's get our cut the tongue grape ready for the next dinner party we're having. We'll tell everybody, hey, I discovered this new grape called Tazzalenghe. Okay, so we'll go on to the Trentino Alto Adige. So for a long while, I was a U.S. ambassador for this region. I think it's one of my favorite regions for exploring what doesn't feel like the rest of Italy. So the Dolomites in the background here. When you think about Alto Adige and also Trento, you think about these little huts, like these beautiful mountain ranges and these incredible apple orchards and rolling hills. And one of the most exciting grapes that I love from the area is for red wine called Terroir. So it's not so rare. This is a woman that I adore, one of my favorite female winemakers. Her name is Elisabetta Foradori. And I had to include her because she makes one of the most incredible Terraldigos that I've ever tasted. Um, it's genetically related to Syrah. We're going to start at the bottom here because I'm so excited about it. And it's very high and smoky, kind of meaty, lavender, all of the qualities that you find in a really good Syrah. She makes a single vineyard Rotagliano, Campo Rotagliano, which is a wine that you can age for decades. So Giraldigo, it's a dark purple color like Syrah. And then not as maybe regal in terms of aging, but certainly one of my other favorite red grapes is a grape called Lagrein. And Lagrein is really found. So Terraldigo, you might think is more on the Trento side, whereas Lagrein is more on the Alto Adige side. So Lagrein is in the valley of southern Tyrol, and it's actually a descendant of Terraldigo. So sometimes there's a cheese in the area that they wrap with Lagrein rather, the grape, and it smells. We used to serve this cheese at Cork Buzz. It's from the Alto Adige area. I'll remember the name of the cheese. Vine Casa. It's called Vine Casa. But anyway, this cheese, this Vine Casa, used to be wrapped or washed rather in Lagrein. And whenever I would sell this cheese to people, I would say, this is like the bacon and egg version of cheese, because the cheese itself had this funky kind of smoked meat or bacon quality, but that was coming from the Lagrein grape. So if you think about it, it's a little bit more soft in tannin, but it's very smoky and meaty. So again, I'm thinking like as the world gets more and more expensive for wine, we need to kind of find wines that are always going to over deliver and we're not going to pay premium prices. So check out some Lagrein. In addition, another red grape in the Alto Adige area that's become more and more popular is a grape called Schiava. Schiava meaning like slave. It was a workhorse grape. It also has synonyms. The names of the synonyms like Vernach and Trollinger. It's called Trollinger in Germany, more specifically in the area called Württemberg. So these wines are very, very light. You might even think of them as rosés. They're not, they can make rosé wine too, but even the reds are very pale in color. This Schiava has a whole family, like I was telling you in Anne's book, there's different Schiava biotypes. And so it's a fun thing, but I would recommend trying Schiava is like a chilled red, perhaps like, you know, maybe with some cheese or just a light red to sip on even by itself. And we have Marzamino. So Marzamino is a grape. You see all these offspring grapes, obviously. It's primarily grown in this region called Isera. Isera is one of the valleys of the Alto Adige, just south of Trentino. And it's thought to be related again to those grapes Terraldigo and Refosco. So Elisabetta, she makes she makes a white grape called Nocciola. I actually think Nocciola is one of the most intriguing noses I've ever smelled for a white wine. It's a grape that is golden skinned. It's like a really intense, deep yellow, really prone to botrytis. So you can have dessert wines from the Nocciola grape. I mean, nocciola is, of course, the Italian for hazelnut. So when you smell it, it smells like this roasted hazelnut. So that's the name of her Nocciola. She's really into it. She's resurrected the grape. And you probably already know about yellow muscat or Moscato Gialla. That could be a really fun grape to try. It's planted in Croatia, and it's also in the Veneto. And that is different than Moscato. There's a whole family of Moscato grapes. And this is Moscato Giallo, which is not the same as like Muscat de Alexandria, that's sweet and dessert style. And at the end, I'm going to check the chat real quick just to see if there's anything we need to talk about. Let's see here. Okay, we were at our restaurant and I was so excited that I pulled out the rosé terroir to go. Nice. That's fun. Um, Yay! Oh, because you learned about it at our last Women in Wines event. So yeah, so I didn't get a chance to mention it. Oh yeah, I love that Schioppettino from Marina Daniele. Yeah, that's cool. We got time. Nice. Okay, cool. So you guys have everything so far. Oh, Timoroso in Brooklyn, Catarato. Yes. All right. Good stuff. Okay, one thing I wanted to tell you is we are doing all the proceeds from this class to, I forgot to mention it in the beginning. Every once a month, there's a community class where we pick a charity and we donate the proceeds, and that's going to the bail fund. So thank you for joining. We're going to write a check to them. And I'm sure when it's not the middle of summer and Fridays, we're going to have bigger community classes to donate more and more money, but every bit helps, right? So thank you. And I'm sure they're thanking you as well. All right, so we're going to take a look at the Veneto. As you might imagine, just south of Trentino, Alto Adige, and you have Emilia Romagna to its south and Lombardia. So you can just familiarize yourself a little bit more with the Veneto areas. So kind of the ones we probably know more are Suave, Valpolicella, and maybe you know about Valle Adige. But so the Veneto is quite big. There's everything from bulk wine to stylized wine. I think the most important stylized wine is probably the wines of the Valpolicella region. And you can have everything from the light cherry red, raspberry styles of straight Valpolicella. We know that we can take those Valpolicella grapes, which include a grape called Corvina, a grape called Rodinella, and a grape called Molinara. None of those grapes are on here because I think that they're more well known. But those grapes are the grapes that you use to make Valpolicella and then Recioto and Amarone. So you can see on this picture here, these are when you take those grapes and you dry them in this like fretai or these rafters, so you can kind of press raisinated grapes and make more concentrated glycerol wines. And those are the styles that we make when we make dry wine from raisinated grapes in the case of Amarone. But I wanted to tell you about these other cool grapes. So we have Cassetta. Cassetta is part of the region of Vallegrina, and its synonymous is Lambrusco. So there's a whole family of Lambrusco grapes. Actually, I listened to Ian's talk on all the different Lambruscos, but this is a synonym with Lambrusco a Foglia Tonda. There's a great region called Terra de Forti rather, and this is a very tannic, fruity wine. So it's dry and tannic Cassetta, but really fruity, which I think makes an interesting wine and why you might find the similarity if you drink certain Lambrusco clones. You get a real fruitiness of raspberries and strawberries, but then you get this nice grip. I always say Lambrusco doesn't get drunk enough, but we should drink it with like pastrami sandwiches. So I think about Cat's Deli and those big monster pastrami sandwiches and getting a bottle of Cassetta or of course Lambrusco in general. It's like a match made in heaven. So kind of like both cured and smoked meat. This is a grape that's not as well known as the other Amarone grapes or Valpolicella grapes, I should say, which is called Corvinone. So this is 2,300 acres worldwide, thought to be related to Corvina, which is the more noble grape. It's really suitable for drying because it's a grape that has a thick skin, so it can dry out and give you a lot of color. And we also have a grape called Croatina. Croatina is more well known in Piedmont, where it's called Bonarda. But I love Croatina. You see it all over Italy. So lots of these grapes you're going to see in other regions. So we won't cover them in the other region because they're growing in, maybe a region where they're thought to be the local. So in Ian's book, he talks about Croatina as more of like a Venetian grape, although you know that everything's kind of crossed over with the Venetian rule, so we're not really sure where it comes from. And then last but not least, we have this really deep colored grape called Rabasso. I love this The name means angry, angry because it is very, very young. It's very tannic. They say it's as tannic as Sagrantino, which is one of the most tannic grapes along with Piedmont. I've not really seen many producers of Rabasso by itself. There's a couple in Anne's book that I don't know that they're exported to the US, but I think if you see it, just give it some time because it is very, very tannic, almost more than you could imagine. Okay, so this is another opportunity to talk about Lombardia. Besides Lombardia that we know mostly is Franciacorta, and we also know there's a region in Lombardia called Valtellina. So we do have Nebbiolo in this area. I didn't describe it, but Chivanesca is the local synonym for Nebbiolo. So when you're talking to a person in Lombardia that's growing Nebbiolo, you would use the Chivanesca. But I'm excited by this Grappello family. This Grappello grape, there's many different parts of the family. So anytime you see Grappello, it actually means it's a reference to the cluster. It's a little bit of a tight cluster, so very compact grapes. What we have in Grappello is mostly around the Lake Garda area of Lombardia, and it gets like really, really bright acidity, high tannin, very exciting, like red cherry. I could even say that it's very similar, maybe to Nebbiolo, Grappello. So it's really a cool grape. And you find it in this area called Bregan. So this is one of my favorite producers. And also we have an Uva Rara grape, which Uva Rara, this is an Uva Rara grape, permitted to blend with Nebbiolo in the area of Alto Piedmont called Gamay. So if you're familiar with Gamay, the region, they're allowed to blend Uva Rara with Nebbiolo, but it grows throughout Lombardia. And it's a late ripening grape, and it's often labeled as in Piedmont. This is not a Piedmont slide, but in Piedmont you might see Colline Novarese. If you're wondering, oh, well, what's the grape in Colline Novarese? That's going to be Uva Rara. Then we have some whites, Moscato Bianco in Verdea, not related to Verdeca. It could make dry sparkling, but it also makes sweet wines. So really delicious stuff there. Let's see. Okay, I'm trying to keep us on track here. We still have so much of the country to discuss, but that's okay. This is the best, right? We can spend all day discussing Lake Piedmont and its local grapes, but to me, this is the king of grapes right now, Timorasso. Like I said, Ian describes it as similar to dry Riesling. I found all the qualities of Chenin Blanc. So Chenin Blanc, waxy, pineapple, golden, sometimes honeyed. It's not that it has like a sweetness to it, but it has those elements of waxy, very textured. I brought it to a friend that likes white Burgundy, and I found that they love the texture, and it could be even the best producers, so inexpensive for the money, so inexpensive for the money. So Walter Massa was one of the kind of founding fathers of this Timorasso grape. So if you ever get a chance and you see Walter Massa's wines in a restaurant, like I said, in Barbaresco proper, the town of Barbaresco, there's a restaurant that's owned by the Gaia family, Angelo Gaia family, and they had verticals of Timorasso from Walter Massa. So we get like with age, all of the characteristics of Chenin Blanc, like wet wool and almost like a funky blue cheese smell and taste, but the texture is what I think is incredible. Most recently, I attended a seminar with, I'll remember his name, from Vieri. I want to say Aldovaca, but I know that's Fruditori di Barbaresco, so I'll remember because he's like such a good friend. I always see him, and so somehow I'm drawing a blank, but he just bought a property in Dertona, which is the birthplace of Timorasso. Dertona is the ancient name for Rome. And their Tona is one of the more famous places. So anyway, he is incredible. So you can imagine some of the best Piedmont producers buying property in this area, Colli Tortonese, and finding still that even the best Barolo producers are buying land there. So you can try Massa, you can try La Colombera. Colombera is great. You can try Muti. Those are some of the smaller producers besides Valtermassa. But of course, Vieri is a wonderful Barolo producer that I think the first vintage of Timorasso on their land was this recent. They did the vertical of their Barolos and they released the Timorasso at Cork Buzz right before this pandemic. So I definitely have it on our list and I recommend it. It's incredible for white Burgundy lovers, which we know white Burgundy is so expensive. So we have Herbaluce. It's not as, I guess, as up and coming. It's a great grape. But I want to talk about the reds. Fresia, Latin for strawberry. In the center, in the third village of Barbaresco, called Nieve, this is home to Fresia. It's actually a the parent grape is Nebbiolo for Fresia, and there's thought to be another grape, but they're not sure exactly what the other parent of Fresia is. But Nebbiolo and Fresia are definitely son-daughter, if you will. I think some of my favorite reds from Piedmont besides Nebbiolo are Fresia. So I would look to getting your favorite Barolo, Barbaresco producers and buying their Fresia. It can be so aromatic like strawberries, almost like a strawberry pie, not in a sweet way, but just like very perfectly ripe strawberries. And then all of this structure that you know and expect from Piedmont, fresh bursts of acidity, dusty tannins that slowly creep up. So it's structure, it's unbelievable. That's all I drank in Piedmont, lots of Fresia from all the best producers. So Bartolo Mascarello, you know, Giuseppe Mascarello, all these guys make beautiful Fresia, but it was almost extinct, as were a lot of grapes. The other grape I wanted to tell you that I think is a opportunity to drink, this is my husband's favorite, is Pella Verga. So this was a grape that was first mentioned in 1600. So it really surrounds the area called Saluzzo, very late ripening, some similar in terms of Fresia. There's a producer called Castello di Verduno. Castello di Verduno in the town of Verduno, not far from La Mora in Barolo. And they make an incredible Pella Verga, as does Berlotto. So when we send you the recap, you're going to see all my notes. My notes have every producer from, not every, but it has like, oh, try this, try that. So sometimes I put them on the slide, sometimes they didn't fit, but they'll be in the notes. So I have some great, you know, Castello di Verduno, Pella Verga, or Berlotto, and so on. And then, I mean, I can't go on too much, but the Ruge grape is another really fun, savory grape. Okay, let's go up to Val d'Aosta. Val d'Aosta, back to northwestern, smallest region. We have an influence of France in the alpine climate. So far northwest, the Western Alps, continental, the Dora Belta has these grapes that are kind of very pure and clean and almost like you feel like you're walking through the Alps and you're just smelling purity. So they have some grapes like that are similar to other grapes. So Pico Tendro is synonym for Nebbiolo. This is one of my favorites. Blanc de Morgex is the region and it's pre-Blanc. So very, very pure, like drinking, I don't want to say water because that sounds negative, but it feels like drinking a mineral white wine that has a lot of, my friend said the other day, like a burst of freshness. And so then we have some Gamay, some Petit Arvine, Petit Rouge, other things like that. Okay, to keep us moving, we'll talk about Tuscany. You probably already know these are the regions. So we have Vernaccia di San Gimignano, we have lots of Sangiovese lands, all these regions, Vino Nobile, Chianti, Brunello, they're all Sangiovese. So we need to talk about things other than Sangiovese. These are some of the kind of lesser known grapes. This is one of the most underappreciated, Cialaggiolo. Its name means small cherry, and it's similar to Sangiovese. So what it has is that sour cherry, tomato leaf, orange rind. Tannins are definitely there. And it grows also in Liguria, so kind of like crosses over. But I would highly recommend this producer, Sasso Tendo. They were very familiar, very instrumental rather in promoting the varietal. And if you're in Liguria and you want to drink some Cialaggiolo, you can try Bison, which is one of my favorite, also Picato producers from Liguria. Maybe it's in time, you probably have heard of Vernaccia. There's so many families of Vernaccia and biotypes. There's red Vernaccia, but this particular example, Vernaccia di San Gimignano, you know that it's from the region of San Gimignano, and it's Italy's first DOC wine. In Liguria, the grape is called Picobon, and this was like so famous. It was a favorite of Lorenzo di Medici. But this is the best producer, I think, humbly, female winemaker, Montenedoli. Montenedoli, in this vineyard, it sits above the town of San Gimignano. San Gimignano is a beautiful walled-in city that you can visit, and it's a great way to explore Tuscany in the village of San Gimignano. But Montenedoli is a woman, she's maybe in her late 80s or early 90s. I just visited with her. Her name is also Elisabetta, and she makes these beautiful Vernaccia wines that are age-worthy. Specifically, this wine called Fiore is oak-aged. She says this is her butter wine, and the Montenedoli Classico is her olive oil wine. So you should check out her wines because they are so good. The first bottle of wine I had when I thought the world was going to go back to normal in March was Montenedoli. I drank it all winter, if you will, with clam chowder. So it's like a really, if you're drinking the Fiore, it's oak aged. If you're drinking the green label, it's the refreshing kind of version. So that's Tuscany, other than Sangiovese. We have Canaiolo and Colorino, which are generally blended with Sangiovese, but I think those are our two highlights. Ansonica can be very cool too. It comes from this island, Ansonica, from the island of Elba. So that's fun too. But we can't stay there in Tuscany. We must explore the Marche. I think that the Marche in general is not as well known as it should be. I used to work with this incredible chef that was from the Marche called Fabio Trabocchi. He owns all these great restaurants in DC. And he made me more familiar with the Marche wine region. Lots of crudo in the area. So you have these kind of lesser known regions, Rosso Conero, Lacrima di Mori d'Alba. You have all the Verdicchio regions, like what we sent you if you got the pack was Verdicchio de Castello di Jesse. So this wine region here. The producer Sartorelli. To me, Verdicchio tastes like Gruner Veltliner. It's very peppery. It's very minerally. It's very savory, but not herbal. So it's very vegetal. It can taste like a lentil soup, kind of like a minestrone, like you're smelling celery and sesame. But actually, the one producer that we sent you, the Sartorelli, if you got it, that is so age-worthy. I've had some older Sartorelli. They have some single vineyards, and it actually becomes incredible how much sesame seeds you get when the Verdicchio de Castello di Jesse ages. So those are some other grapes that grow in the Marche besides Verdicchio, but I think it's one of the coolest kind of different types of grape, Verdicchio de Castello di Jesse or Verdicchio de Metallica. And then you have Pecorino. Pecorino actually randomly smells like cheese. I know it's the name of a cheese, but if you've ever had the Pecorino grape, it's very like Chablis. It's like leesy and cheesy and really delicious with pasta. But then the Conero, for the reds, you mostly see Montepulciano and Sangiovese. So I won't spend too much time talking about Montepulciano. But interesting if you see Vernaccia di Serra Petrano, you would think, okay, Vernaccia is a white grape And remember, in Vernaccia, we sometimes use a white grape. In this case, Vernaccia di Serrapetrano is a red grape. So that's the whole thing, right? The biotype, they have red versions of the same grape. And this is interesting. If you ever see Lacrima di Mora d'Alba, so Lacrima di Mora d'Alba over here, this area, Lacrima is a grape. It's a red grape. One of the most floral grapes I've ever smelled. I'm talking, if you think about Malbec and you say, oh, Malbec smells like violets and it smells like intense, like grapes, like I say Malbec is the color purple. Lacrima di Mora d'Alba, the first time I smelled it, I was like, I think I'm in African violet. It smells so intense. And you know the thing about violets, right? The smell goes away after a few minutes because that's the thing about violets. Like you smell it and then your nose doesn't smell it anymore. So next time you have an opportunity, try Lacrima di Mora d'Alba. Very, very floral. Some people think it's too floral. Like when I used to work in an all Italian restaurant, I would be very careful when I recommended it. I think it's beautiful, but it's not, necessarily for everybody. Some people would say, whoa, it's too floral, it's too perfumed. Okay, on to Umbria, and landlocked in between Tuscany and La Marche. Probably they're not that different or odd. There's a grape called Grechetto that's allowed to be used in the wines of Orvieto. And Sagrantino. I think Sagrantino is well known, but it should be talked about. This is an incredible producer that makes both reds and whites called Palobea. Palobea wines are skin fermented, some whites, some really interesting things. But Sagrantino is very tannic, very tannic. It's like the Barolo of the South. And I really love the Sagrantino, especially from Montefalco. Tannic, dark, deep, earthy, rustic, funky, beautiful wine. And often blended with Sangiovese. This Torgiano Rosso Reserva can be really incredible. The producer Lungarotti, I've had some Lungarotti wines back to like the early 90s. So if you ever see Lungarotti, it's 70% Sangiovese with some Sagrantino. So try those wines. Okay. We would not be talking about indigenous grapes if we weren't talking about Campania. So lots of Greek influence, which makes sense, right? So far south, central Italy, on the Amalfi Coast, lots of volcanic soils. A lot of the white smell, very volcanic soil. So what's the major difference between the two big grapes? So there's a whole family of Greco grapes. So in Calabria, you have a different version of Greco. But they say that these are the latest ripening of all the grapes in Campania. Higher in alcohol. So when I smell, like, there's a producer called Fiudi de San Gregorio, and they make both Fiano, Falangina, and Greco. The ones that are richer and higher in alcohol, that's the Greco. So I like the producer Ferrara, Benito Ferrara, is so beautiful. So you can imagine pineapple, and they start to become slightly tropical, but then the minerality kicks in. So it's smelling like ashy, very hot soil, very like, kind of gets up in your nose like pepperwood. Really beautiful. Like if you imagine having Napolitan pizza, you're having like a bubbly cheese pizza that has like the char. So good with Greco or Falangina. Very inexpensive. There's also other grapes, like I like the Biancolella grape and Forastera. So now the most exciting red grape you probably heard of is Aglianico. So that definitely belongs as the three most important red grapes of Italy: Nebbiolo, Sangiovese, Aglianico. So the producer Mastro Berardino, they make a wine from the region called Taurasi. Taurasi is the DOCG, this one here, where Aglianico comes from. But you can find Aglianico in Basilicata and Molise as well. So to me, the most exciting grapes, Aglianico, and Guanaccia is also known as Grenache. Okay, let's go to Sardinia. I told you I'm going to run 5 minutes over. I'm sorry. There's just way too much to cover. So Sardinia, part of the Kingdom of Aragon. 400 years, it was part of Spain. So lots of Spanish grapes. I mentioned in the very beginning, Cannonau, identical to Grenache. Most important red grape. There's so much of it. These are some great producers, Dettori, Argiolas. So Cannonau is very similar to the Rhone Grenache. So it's kind of it's a grape that has it does not have a lot of color because it doesn't, just like Pinot Noir, have anthelated anthocyanins. So it's kind of like a very pale garnet color grape. So it gets oxidized early. And it has a sweet and sour kind of quality to it. Like it has sun-kissed strawberries, orange rind, white pepper, very beautiful wines. And then for the white Vermentino, there's really this back and forth. I was reading the discussion or listening to the discussion on Vermentino. If you're in Liguria, they say Vermentino is not Pigato. And if you're, because they have two different grapes in Liguria, Pigato and Vermentino. But others will say, no, Vermentino is Pigato. So they go back and forth. So if you read Pigato is different than Vermentino, you probably will read that. But it's just this grape that's clouded in mystery. Is it Italian? Is it Spanish? You know, the Spanish, they think it might be Spanish because it's part of Sardinia, but the only DOCG for Vermentino in Italy is Vermentino di Gallura. I love these wines with sheep milk cheese. They have a cheese called Capre Sardo. It's really good. Get some Vermentino di Gallura. You can ride your moped all over Sardinia, and you can have these picnics on this beautiful, you know, kind of Mediterranean. And anyhow, all right, so Calabria. This is my favorite at the moment. I love the region of Ciro. So I buy as much Ciro wines, that's a region, but the grape is Galliopo. The Greek word meaning beautiful foot because of the clusters. One of Italy's oldest grapes called Cremisa. It was the reward for the winners of the Olympic Games. The ancient city of Ciro, not a lot of anthocyanins, which are color. So just like Grenache or Pinot Noir, it's reddish, it oxidizes. It is incredible. There's a producer called Lombardy. I think they're whites from Grechetto, they're reds, they're rosés. I cannot get enough. So please, please, please drink some Galliopo, enjoy it, and say that I told you so, because it's great. This is where Ciro is, this region, but the region of Melissa also is growing the Galliopo grape. So these two regions are some of my favorites for this grape. I don't know that it's grown anywhere else in the world. I've never seen Galliopo outside of Calabria. High acid, and it says rough tannins, but the tannins are really fine. To me, it's like another inexpensive Nebbiolo. And last but not least, we're going to talk about my grandparents' home of Sicily. There was a period of time where we, as a court buzz, took a group of people all over Sicily. I took like 20 people on a tour. The most important region is Etna, near Campania, and then Chiarasuolo di Vittoria, which is the only DOCG. So I wanted to take some time, because I know you're talking and tasting the Caricante. Someone was talking about Caricante. To me, Caricante is white Burgundy. So Caricante means to load up, because it used to be that there was a big volume of Caricante. The grapes produced most high volume, but now as they're lowering the yield and going up in altitude in some villages like Via Grande and Randazzo, it becomes very, very flinty and very much like diesel. The grape itself has TDN, which is a characteristic of petrol. To me, when we were in Sicily, we were at Benanti winery. Benanti, I think, is one of the oldest in Etna. And they make a Caricante called Piatra Marina that is so good. And one of the Benanti brothers, Salvino, he is like the head of the DOCG of Etna. Definitely, you should try Caricante. And then they make also Nerello Mascalese. So Nerello Mascalese is, to me, it's a very similar grape to Pinot Noir in that it has that light color. It can be really soft and perfumed, but also has high acid. And it's often blended with a grape called Nerello Cappuccio. So Nerello Mascalese is a light color grape. So when you blend it with Nerello Cappuccio, you get a darker color. So often you do see it's a sibling too of Galliopo. So you see how the world becomes one, right? Galliopo, I know I like that. It's from Ciro in Calabria, and we see it in the other Strait of Messina on the opposite. The toe that is Calabria kicking Sicily also sends its grapes across. So that is the end. Let me stop sharing. Do we have any questions in the chat? Pecorino is a great grape. Yep, you are correct. Anything anyone wants to ask live before we hang up our call? Okay, well, happy Friday. Let's see, we have a new message. Tazzalonghe, Robasso Flynet Cork Buzz this fall. Yes, we do. I think that might be Ryan. I can't see who wrote it, but we're definitely going to have some of these grapes available. So if there's ever any question or you need help finding anything, please message us. We can either connect you or tell you, we can find a local wine shop if you don't see something that you need. We can find out where these great grapes are from. So definitely buy Ian DeGatta's book if you're interested in more of this fun as the world turns around native grapes. And thank you. Thanks for your donation to the Bail Fund too. We appreciate it. We are happy to support. And if you have any ideas for community classes that you'd like to see us, donate some proceeds. It's a small amount, but it's always fun to be able to hear from our guests, like what they're passionate about. And, charities are fun ways to build community. So take care, guys. Talk soon. Bye.